Asian Americans are facing discrimination not felt since the Japanese-American internment camps during World War II.
This morning, 8 grieving families and countless communities reeling after Tuesday night's deadly shooting spree in Georgia.
This is happening to our elderly and to Asian women.
This surveillance footage shows a 71-year-old Asian grandmother violently shoved to the ground.
The man police believe is responsible for this violent attack of a 91-year-old.
The Chinese virus, Kung Flu.
China.
China.
Asian lives matter! Asian lives matter! It took 6 Asian women massacred and murdered for people to care! What else is it going to take? When are we going to see change?
Hi everyone, we are VDSA, KDSA, and CDSA, and thank you so much for taking the time to watch our video. In times like these where so many members of our communities have been affected by recent events, we would really like for our organizations to come together and educate, reflect, and just share our thoughts about everything that's been going on. And we hope that we can share these thoughts with the UCLA School of Dentistry students and faculty members. As a disclaimer, we would like to emphasize that each of our stories and viewpoints are not completely representative of what it means to be Asian American, Eastern Asian American, or even Korean, Vietnamese, Chinese American. Each of our stories are unique and should be treated as such.
Many of us probably started hearing about anti-Asian hate crime through a tragic incident that happened in Atlanta in March. A series of mass shootings occurred at 3 spots in Atlanta, Georgia. 8 people were killed and 6 of them were Asian women. This event shocked many of us because people believed that this shooting was specifically targeted to Asians. And after this event, there were continuous waves of news that went viral in many social media and news platforms with disturbing incidents that are suspected to be anti-Asian hate crime. Anti-Asian hate crime in 16 of America's largest cities increased 145% in 2020. Also from March to May 2020 alone, over 800 COVID-related hate incidents were reported from 34 counties in the states within a 3-month period. Those numbers have ever since intensified in Orange County, whereas anti-Asian hate incidents are up by an estimated 1,200%. In Los Angeles County, hate crimes against Asian Americans went up to 115%. Why do you think this is happening? Let's take a look at what histories Asians have had in America and talk about how those shaped Asian American culture over time and how they have been portrayed by others.
Let's start off with some historical context, beginning with the Yellow Peril, one of the first well-documented directly xenophobic movements against people of East Asian descent. The Yellow Peril began in the 19th century when Chinese workers immigrated to traditionally white continents in the West, including the U.S. Many Western countries were afraid of the supposed danger these new immigrants posed to their way of life and centered their racist ideologies around the belief that these Chinese immigrants were more primitive or lesser. This illustration of a Chinese man standing over a fallen white woman was one of many images depicting the Chinese as barbaric and bestial. In a prime example of the dangerous repercussions of racist rhetoric, the anti-Chinese sentiment perpetuated by the media played a large role in the incitement of the Chinese massacre of 1871, in which a mob of 500 white men tortured, murdered, and lynched 19 Chinese men, one of whom was a 14-year-old boy. 9 people were convicted of manslaughter, but the California Supreme Court overturned the conviction on a technicality, and all 9 men were released. Despite being one of the worst mass lynchings in American history, the massacre quickly faded from relevance. Its brutality did not spurn the call for tolerance, and it did nothing to quell anti-Asian sentiments, which only increased in the following years. A decade after the massacre, the U.S. signed into law the Chinese Exclusion Act, which remains to this day the only law to have been implemented preventing all members of a specific ethnic group from immigrating to the U.S. Today, in the wake of the increased hate and violence against Asian Americans, it behooves us to reflect on our history and realize that if allowed, racism against Asian Americans will continue unchecked, as it has since generations before. We hope that in the making of this video, we are aiding in a revolution that acts as the pivotal turning point in our long history as Asian Americans.
I'm sure that many of you have heard this term before. On the surface level, the idea of a model minority seems to be a praiseworthy term. This term acknowledges and celebrates a minority group's success in America. However, let's talk about the 1965 Immigration Act that reversed restrictions on immigrants coming to America from certain countries, particularly in Asia. This act gave top priority to immigrants who already had direct family members in America to be reunited with their family members. The next priority was given to highly educated immigrants. These included those who worked in engineering or medicine, and these immigrants came mostly from South Korea and China. Many of these individuals have stayed in America and had children or grandchildren since then, and this is the group of Asian Americans that have received the most attention and coverage in mainstream media. Unfortunately, when we overgeneralize Asian Americans in this way, we are indirectly invalidating the hardships of certain ethnic groups of Asian Americans that were not part of this big wave of immigration. Asian Americans have one of the highest income disparities of any race in America, but this is not what is commonly talked about in mainstream media. In this graph from the New York Times that was published in 2018, a study of the US Census and American Community Survey data by the Pew Research Center showed that there was a huge difference in education levels between different ethnic Asian American groups, and this huge difference correlated with differences in average and median household income. When we buy into this idea of a model minority, we are not only dismissing the hardships of Cambodian Americans, Laotian Americans, Hmong Americans, and other oppressed Asian American groups, but also other minorities in America.
In recent media, so many of the stories of violence against Asian Americans have featured Black perpetrators, even though there is no evidence to suggest that Black Americans are predominantly responsible for this rise in attacks, or that they are particularly more hostile towards Asian Americans. It is so sad to say that the white supremacist roots of this country are pitting Asians and Blacks against one another. In doing so, the support and mutual respect that both communities have increasingly shown each other has been overshadowed and just turned into more xenophobia and hate. This is also nothing new in American history, and while these two groups have very different struggles in America, our histories have been linked in some ways. In 1965, the U.S. ended the quota-based system of immigration, leading to an influx of high-skilled labor. One of this group were Koreans who immigrated to become small business owners in predominantly Black communities. The immigrated Koreans were unable to enjoy the social status and education level they had in their home country due to racial discrimination and other barriers. Black people couldn't open their own businesses, and this sparked bitterness on both sides. The most notable collision occurred during the 1992 LA riots. The riot was sparked by the acquittal of 4 white LAPD officers after beating up and videotaping Rodney King, a Black man. In the same month, LaTasha Harlins, a 15-year-old Black girl who was accused of trying to steal orange juice, was shot by a Korean store owner, who received probation and a $500 fine. The LA riot was a showcase for the anger of these verdicts. More than 50 people were killed and 1,000 were injured. Many believe the 1992 riots are emblematic of the relations between Black Americans and Asian Americans despite being the product of a specific time and place. After the riots, churches and community organizers worked to educate the two communities on their shared histories of oppression. There are countless more instances where our two communities have worked together to protest and educate, including in the past year with all that has gone on to affect both communities. We hope that our video can also play a role in showcasing the successes that can come with working together and mutual respect.
A lot of the ways that people get their implicit biases are through media and television, and historically, Asians have been underrepresented and misrepresented and unfairly put into stereotypes. Asian men are placed into desexualized positions where they're either the nerdy math geek or they're just a kung fu freak. And women are hypersexualized as either dragon ladies where they are femme fatales, or they are subservient, obedient people to push your sexual desires on. The dangerous thing about these representations are that they form how people see us. And Asian people have these stereotypes where people immediately place their appearance with a certain particular personality trait. And they amount us to nothing more than just a stereotype.
It isn't shocking that the COVID-19 pandemic and the resultant anti-Asian rhetoric has caused an increase in violence against the Asian American community. The WHO has explicitly stated not to link location, and disease. Yet we got our policymakers going on mass media outlets using terms like Chinese flu and Wuhan virus. And this type of rhetoric is causing an increase in hate towards certain groups of people. And it's honestly misdirected. Now, this type of hate has been coming and showing up in multiple forms. Not only is it verbal harassment, but also in the form of physical violence. And what's even more disturbing is that this physical violence has, as of late, been targeting the elderly in the Asian American community. Now, something else to keep in mind is that although Asian Americans have been scapegoated for a lot of the hospitalizations and the deaths that the COVID-19 pandemic has caused, it is very important to remember that Asian Americans actually make up the largest proportion of frontline healthcare workers in comparison with their population size. Now, with the COVID-19 virus going around and killing so indiscriminately, there's another virus going around, and that one is specifically targeting Asian Americans.
So it happened back when I was in high school. I went to the beach with a couple of my girlfriends, and once we found a spot to start unpacking, I was looking around and there was a small group of people hanging out. And I got in eye contact with one of the guys there, and suddenly he was like, "Hey, Ching Chong Ling Long." And then he turned around and then to his friends, and they started cackling. So of course my friends and I were just incredibly bothered, disturbed, and just very shocked. And initially my friends just wanted to ignore him, repack our stuff and move to another location. But originally I would have done the same thing too. But there was an instance when someone yelled at my mom, "F you, Asian." And due to my mom's limited English, she couldn't say anything back. And I feel like that instance just translated to my experience at that time. So I was just fueled with anger and just disgust. So I yelled back at him, "What'd you say? Come back here," and then say it to my face. And I think just the anger from my mom's experience, and also the fact that he said it so naturally, and I guess that it was a joke among him and his friends. And it gave me the idea that because they were just so nonchalant about it, it seemed that they've done it a lot, and each time they did it, no one talked back at them. So that somehow cemented their belief that it is acceptable to say such comments, and mainly because they think that the people within the AAPI community comes from a lesser place from him. So when I said that, it was pretty funny because his friends and he were just very genuinely shocked. And after that, my friends and I just repacked and we left. And another funny thing is that we actually ran into them again. But this time his friends pushed him towards our direction to apologize. But his apology was that it was just a quote-unquote joke. And when he said that, I really couldn't accept his apology because that made him seem like he didn't understand the severity of his words, how insulting and degrading it is. And it also made it seem like the problem was me for not having the lighthearted sense of humor, for not seeing it as a joke.
Though it is important to educate ourselves and raise awareness, it is simply not enough. Our elders are being attacked unprovoked on a daily basis. Our leaders are reluctant to prosecute these incidents as hate crimes, with some of the suspects repeat offenders. Therefore, we must be vigilant in our approach. In order to protect ourselves and our elderly, we should, most importantly, be aware of our surroundings. Don't let yourself become a victim. Consider purchasing a taser. I bought my mom a taser for Mother's Day because she works in San Francisco, where most of the attacks are occurring. Consider purchasing pepper spray or getting involved in self-defense techniques. If these techniques do not feel sufficient, then you may also consider applying for a carry a concealed weapon permit in California. However, the approval rates will vary depending on what county you're in. It is my observation that these attacks are perpetrated against elderly Asians because they are perceived as docile, and we need to change that perception of us if we want to put an end to these attacks. Here are some useful sources to follow to keep yourself up to date.
There are a lot of ways to help your AAPI community. First, you can report hate crimes to your local police, then file a report with the FBI. Next, you can also support Asian American owned restaurants or seek out volunteer opportunities to help the AAPI community. This is a great way to build relationships with community members and help keep each other safe. Next, you could also take a bystander intervention course. You can also donate to the AAPI Community Relief Fund. Donations will support organizations that empower and protect the AAPI community and everyone affected by anti-Asian violence. Also, you can donate to Asian Americans Advancing Justice. AAJC fights for Asian Americans' civil rights and empowers the community through education, litigation, and public policy advocacy. Lastly, you should educate yourself with credible articles, podcasts, and documentaries, and continue to stay up to date on policies and movements, and share that information with your community.
The historical events and societal implications that were talked about today in our video barely scratch the surface of the causes of increase of recent violence against our AAPI communities. We hope that our video provided for a good foundation for our viewers to reflect upon their own internalized biases, question the intricacies of systemic racism, engage in discussion, and spur greater change for good within the community. Thank you so much for watching.